Hello, everyone. Hello and welcome, thank you. Welcome to The Big Debate, coming to you live on SABC2, SABC News Channel 404 and SAFM. We're also live on SABC News YouTube channel. I'm Ridi Tlabi. Which side of the tracks do you live on? Alex or Sandton? Khayelitsha or Constantia? South Africans live in the most divided cities in the world. Our wealthiest residents own luxurious mansions that film stars in LA would envy, in gated estates or secure suburbs. The people who clean their homes and tend to their gardens stay in urban slums. This reality was created by apartheid, but 25 years later, it has changed little. When we redevelop our neighborhoods, from Maboneng to Woodstock or Ushaga, we push out the poor. If you try to propose affordable housing in Sandton or Bishop's Court, you'll be hounded out of your local WhatsApp group by angry neighbors. The poor black majority live far from jobs and services. Commuters in Diepsloot don't have Gautrain or Rea Vaya. Do we have a vision for integrated, livable cities? Can we break through the NIMBY chorus of people saying, "Not in my backyard"? To discuss this, I'm joined by Herman Mashaba, DA Mayor of Joburg, Trevor Fowler, former ANC City Manager here in Joburg, Mike Sutcliffe, former ANC City Manager in Durban, Brett Herron, who was in the DA Mayoral Committee in Cape Town with Patricia de Lille as Mayor, now in the Good Party, Mandisa Shandu from Ndifuna Ugwazi in Cape Town, Nomzamo Zondo from the Socio-Economic Rights Institute, and a lawyer who has made her name representing poor and marginalized communities. Now, we also have academics and experts, including Maxwellian of the Sustainability Institute in Stellenbosch, Neville Cheney from the National Department of Human Settlements, Musa Gwebani of the Social Justice Coalition in Khayelitsha, Sbuzi Kode of Abahlali Basemijondolo in Durban, and activists and residents from Alex, Diepsloot, Woodstock, Joburg CBD, and from communities across the country. Welcome to all of you. So, you at home can also have your say on social media and in our poll. This week, we asked if it's time to build affordable housing in all our neighborhoods, including wealthy suburbs. Now, from 6,000 votes, 2/3 of you said yes. The other third said no. Some people responded by saying that low-cost housing nearby will reduce their property prices. So what do you think? Vote now for free. We need to mention, this is important, that we did invite the private sector, large city developers and financiers, including Liberty, FNB, Nedbank, Rand Merchant Holdings, but nobody was available. So before we start the debate on cities and inequality, take a look at this.
This week, Alex Township erupted into flames.
Alex has not improved as a township. Alex has been a cash cow for politicians, and it will remain cash cow for politicians as long as the community doesn't stand up and shut it down like it has shut down today. People are still living in dire situation.
Alex was built for 70,000. Today, it houses hundreds of thousands.
We are just a throw stone away from Sandton. And for that matter, the growth of Sandton has become 100 times more than the development of the actual township that built Sandton, which is Alexandra.
Well, of course, South Africa's spatial planning system for most of South Africa's history was a racist planning system. The vast majority of the population were excluded from the vast majority of the land.
In '94, the ANC promised to integrate our cities with housing, transport, and services for all. 4 million homes were delivered, but many are poor quality and far from jobs. The backlog is 2 million and rising. Cape Town, playground for the rich. Behind the glitz lies a deeply divided city. With seafront prices soaring, developers have moved to neighborhoods like Woodstock.
I was born in Woodstock. I'm 52 years old. I was married here, I had my children here. I have 3 children, 2 grandchildren. I don't want to be anywhere else.
Fahmida Ling occupied the former Woodstock hospital with 50 other families after they were evicted from their homes when rentals hit the roof.
Only a accommodation that the council had for us was a place called Wolverrivier. And this is a place 30 kilometers out of the inner city. And when we came there, oh my goodness, to our shock, this was like a concentration-like camp. One entry, one exit.
The occupation of the hospital was declared illegal by the city of Cape Town. Budget cuts nationally have slowed housing delivery and left private developers in the driving seat in our cities.
The problem is that there isn't the political will to either activate the informal settlement upgrading policy or the emergency housing policy.
In our divided cities, it seems everyone has their place. The removal of revelers at Clifton Beach by private security in December 2018 touched a nerve.
At the center is white people who want to keep and privatize such beauty to be white enclaves where they use force to get us out so that we can be logged in the locations in Khayelitsha, Hanover Park, and places like Mfuleni.
Poor commuters rely on taxis and buses, while the wealthy enjoy heavily subsidized transport like the Gautrain. Policymakers from all parties say they are doing their best to improve the lives of the urban poor.
We have to have a comprehensive approach. We must deal with the issues that have to do with crime and drugs. We must also deal with the economic opportunities, housing issues in these areas, improving infrastructure, the overall look and feel of these townships.
Back in Woodstock and Alex, people are not convinced.
There's this understanding that poor people cannot live close to the inner city, that poor people should be displaced.
What we want is to live as people who are respected, whose rights are respected, who are living in a dignified way.
We are 25 years into democracy. People are still homeless. Why are they not utilizing the land that we have instead of selling it off to private developers?
Okay, so this is unprecedented on South African television. We have former and present city managers sitting here with the communities. I know it's election time. The temptation to score points is there. But I'm just inviting you to really reflect and have an authentic connection with our audience today. 25 years into democracy, who amongst you will be the first to take responsibility for Khayelitsha versus Camps Bay, Imizamo Yethu versus Hout Bay, Alex, Diepsloot versus Sandton, Umhlanga, Zimbali versus Kwamashu? Mike, Trevor, Brett, who's going to take responsibility?
I think we all must. Certainly there's no doubt in my mind that we've got to look quite carefully at what has happened. But I do think a lot has also happened, that at times we look at just those extremes rather than actually looking at what's gone on. We have built many houses because the fact is that under apartheid you had probably 20% of the community benefiting from all the property rates. Today in Johannesburg, for example, and I'd like the mayor to answer that, if you look at the current rates in Johannesburg, ratepayers are paying about 3 billion rand more than the budget wanted. And that shouldn't be, because that's money that should be invested in communities. Secondly, we've got to knit the cities together. And we have got, and in fact it's looked in worldwide terms, an integrated urban development strategy, which looks not just at places like the big cities, but the fact that Bushbuck Ridge, for example, has more people at high densities than Mohali City. So you've got to look at it in the national context.
Let's talk about your record in Durban. You were not sympathetic to people like Abahlali Basemijondolo. And not only that, there was a lot of controversy around the profitability of Ushaka Marine. Swanky apartments, but no real development. And then we also know that the Auditor General's report of 2010 and 2011 found a lot of irregularities in the housing contracts, around 400 million rand. We know the Mbisanis are in the news. There's some tax, fraud and corruption and so on. You didn't do so well yourself as city manager.
Not true. Every element of fraud there was investigated when I was city manager, and it was concluded. All of that fraud that is reported on was fraud reports that I gave to those investigators. Not one bit of extra thing was done there. Yes, we had engagements with Spusakodi, and I've got a lot of appreciation for them, because ultimately these have to be inclusionary cities. We have a constitution and a set of judgments that have actually made that the case. So certainly SPU and
are you happy?
each other
Where's
very
the
well.
microphone? The microphone is sitting there. SPU, are you happy? The city manager says they did their best. Why are you not satisfied?
Well, certainly not. Abahlali are still neglected, and moreover, Abahlali are facing a number of evictions which are often at gunpoint. They are unlawful in many ways, but also the cities have actually militarized the anti-land invasion unit. You go to the city of Cape Town, here the red ants, eThekwini the blue ants, the anti-land invasion unit have actually violating the rights of people. The right to the city, the right to housing has been a big issue that has actually meant that the impoverished people can no longer have an opportunity in our cities. It is most unfortunately that 25 years of democracy, abahlali basemkhukhwini around the country are still facing landlessness, homelessness, but again, the political unwillingness to do anything.
And on the political unwillingness, I mean, we've got that historic Grootboom case when it comes to housing in 2000, and it actually took into account the constraints that national government or all different layers of governments have. But it also said that the state has a duty to provide housing for the poor. People are pushed into corners where they now have to take land by force. How do you defend your record?
Well, certainly, Reddy, the important thing to note is that in the past 25 years, the apartheid spatial pattern hasn't been affected. But in Joburg, what we started was something called corridors of freedom, really to knit the cities together, to ensure that that poor people who live in Soweto, who live far from the city, are able to be a part of the city and change the housing pattern so that people are living in the city. So we've had public hearings in several areas. I remember one in around Perth, where we talked about the corridors of freedom. And some of the residents there said, when people were speaking, that they were, you know, we had a slogan that said, "Live, work, and play in the city." And one of the residents said, when we talked about this, he said, "You mean once people are here, are you going to go back home at night?" And of course, that was really missing the point. The point was it was an attempt to try to change that.
So an attempt. Has it happened, Nomzamo? Are people living closer to where they work? Are we integrated? And so on. Do you buy that?
Definitely not, Reddy. I think the first thing that I must say is that instead of government working towards inclusion, with government actively taking land away from poor people and giving it to private developers, giving it to the rich. And you can take Maboneng as an example. You can take the inner city of Joburg as an example. So what you've had in 1950, you had the Group Areas Act, where the Minister of Interior's job was to take valuable land from black people like Sophia Town, give it to white people. 25 years later, 25 years after democracy, we have mayors in the local government taking land, valuable land from poor people in the inner city, giving it to private developers. So it hasn't happened. And in fact, my organization litigates daily against all the municipalities that are represented here in order to ensure that poor people have access to land.
And in fact, in Cape Town, we had that. I know that you are with the Good Party now, but Mayor de Lille was there for 7 years. I mean, I saw a tweet of hers just yesterday lamenting the exclusion of people from Imbizamoye to and Hannenberg, I think the area was. And I did a double take. I thought, this is barefaced politicking. How do you blame the DA and the ANC? You've just recently left the Democratic Alliance, scoring cheap political points. And I did think, what is the former mayor doing? Smoking her socks on the streets of Twitter?
You know, I mean, already what we're hearing here is talk about plans and strategies that are in place or being talked about. But I agree with the insert that we saw in those people from Woodstock, that actually nothing has happened in 25 years. Absolutely nothing. And it is a failure of political courage and political leadership. And we demonstrated, I think I demonstrated in the first few months of being responsible for housing, by identifying 11 sites in the inner city, city-owned land, public land we should talk about, not city-owned land,
but
public
the city
land.
Sells it to developers. That Sea Point area that was very controversial.
We identified the land, and in local government you only have the power of that your caucus gives you. And when the Democratic Alliance said, we don't support you, that's when I resigned. So there is the opportunity to change our cities using public land that's in good locations, but you need political courage and you need political leadership in order to do it.
Was there political courage and leadership? You claim that that's why you stepped away from the Democratic Alliance. I mean, when did you realize that it was over its refusal to embrace inclusionary housing and low-cost integrated housing?
Well, in the 2016 local government elections, I was the campaign manager for the Democratic Alliance in Cape Town. And I went around for 7 months. It was a long election campaign with a manifesto that said we will integrate communities.
Why did it not happen? How did they stop you?
And when I started to do it, I was stopped.
By whom?
By the DA caucus in Cape Town. They voted against using a site in Salt River for a mixed-use affordable housing development. We issued a call for proposals for 5 sites out of those 11. They've not moved a single bit. We've had 15 proposals lying in that city government since February last year. They would have opened sites in the inner city and in Woodstock and Salt River. Because I agree with what Fahmida said in that interview.
Does the mayor take any responsibility for any of that?
Let me finish this part, that there is a tendency for the old parties, DA and ANC parties, to sell off good land as a trading commodity, and public land belongs to the public.
DA mayor in Johannesburg, is that what you're doing? You're privileging developers at the expense of poor people, selling off buildings and property to developers because they have the money, pushing out the poor once again.
When I took over this administration.
Let him answer. Let him answer.
When I took over this administration on the 1st of December during my 100 days in office, I declared that we're going to take over the city of Johannesburg to develop affordable accommodation for our people, student accommodation, and SME development. I said the days of the Rosebanks and Sandtons of this world to be the primary focus of my government, that is not going to happen. We're going to take back this city from this criminal elements, because I could not understand why we allowed this city to be taken over by criminal elements. But at the end of the day, some senior politicians were beneficiaries to that. And you remember, I became a very unpopular. Today, I'm happy, glad that City Council of Johannesburg approved my inner city rejuvenation. We're taking back these properties, offering them to the private sector, because as a city, we don't have the money. But on condition, demonstrate to us how much money you're going to invest. Demonstrate to us your BE credentials. Demonstrate to us what type of rentals you're going to charge. And we give you a long list. The proposals are there. We've got 154 buildings in the inner city. Us as the city of Johannesburg, end of February, we've passed an inclusionary housing.
But the problem with the inclusionary housing policy is that you stipulated that 30% of all new developments must go to low-cost housing in residential areas where there are 20-plus units. But then the final look of it is that you've capitulated to the same developers, because you're saying that the city is going to control the size, determine the size of these properties, but not the rental. You're leaving it up to the market. That's not how it originally looked.
Where we're saying as a city of Johannesburg, we're going to control the prices. It's in the properties that belong to us. That is why we've got today, we've identified over 500 properties, 154 of them already out there for tenders. We control what type of prices they're going to be charging our people, so that people can work, live, and play in the inner city. And other notes, we identified the areas like Randbeck, Roodepoort, and other areas along the Louis-Botha, where we've got our own properties. We are saying to the private sector, we're not selling you this land, this
Are
pieces
they
of
committing
that
on paper to developing
low-cost
housing?
There's no way that you're going to really get the support of our administration. So we're the only municipalities, as a new administration, just under 2 years, we've managed to really take back the city of Johannesburg from the criminal elements, and we are going to succeed.
The criminal elements, I'm just thinking the criminal elements may just be the property developers in Sandton themselves. But Maxwellian, how do we bring this all together? What needs to happen here?
Well, what we need to recognize is that over the last 25 years, yes, we invested a lot of money in 4 million houses, but in the wrong places. That's the point of departure. And why did we do that? Because of the property markets. the property markets determined that high prices are where jobs and infrastructure are located, and the poor were dumped on the edges where land is cheap. We are going to have to intervene in the property market in ways that is going to upset the financial institutions, the construction industry, and many of the other people who benefit from the way in which the urban property market works. But there are precedents all over the world for doing that. We just haven't had the courage to do it. And our regulatory environment actually protects land. What changes the ballgame are land invasions. Land invasions have resulted in the redistribution of land, of urban land on a massive scale.
You support them?
I do support land invasions because they work.
Okay, let's take a break. Let's take a break. Hold that thought. We'll talk more about that. When we return, we talk to activists from the Alex Total Shutdown and from Woodstock and Khayelitsha. Don't go anywhere. The big debate on cities coming to you on SABC2 and SABC News Channel 404. This week, residents of Alex organized a total shutdown over poor housing and services and corruption in the allocation of homes. They stopped traffic on the N3 highway. Now, the local ANC branch came out in support of the Alex protest. Benjamin Chisari was one of the protest leaders who spoke in our insert. We heard him earlier, and he's here in the studio today. Let's just hear what he makes of the party politics and what the issues are in Alex. So you've got support from the ANC. They came out and said, Mayor Herman Mashaba, in your administration, you have failed. You must be very happy to have support from the ANC.
No, we are not happy. In fact, we are disappointed. As a bone of contention, the Alex shutdown was not designed to be hijacked and to run electioneering for party politics. What we wanted was service delivery for the mere communities of Alex, irrespective of the fact that you belong to which political party. But we as the community are saying we are sick and tired of people taking our lives, playing with our hopes, and making sure that they only come when there is time for elections. Hence, we have said that the Alex shutdown was mainly focused on 3 issues. The first issue was the issue of housing, where our people, as far as 1996 up until 2008, have not benefited those houses. The people that have C forms were not even given those houses. Some of them have been approved by the system, but they are not staying in those houses. Some of them, their records are not even existing in the National Human Settlements Database. So these are the injustices.
Why is that? What do you attribute that to? Often we hear politicians saying there's migration, about 100,000 people moving into Johannesburg every single day. You have Alex, there are millions of people, the informal settlements. They simply don't have the resources for the needs that are there.
The problem is that they are professional liars.
Why
do you
say they're lying? Why do you say they're lying?
The reason is one, we know each other in Alex, and we know those that came and seek dwelling in Alex. The problem came with Sanko when it said Pambiling Emikuku in Alex. That's where the problem started. But the mere people that stayed in Alex for more than 52 years, we're talking about people that even have permits staying in bond houses. They were not even catered for in the development. Now, what we are saying as Alex is that somehow we need to also include independent candidates in the 2 spheres that they are not represented, in the National Assembly and the provincial legislature, because Section 19(3)B in the country's constitution talks about that. And it's eminent that the whole community of South Africa, not particularly Alex, postpone the elections up until the Zondo Commission is complete.
You're calling for the postponement of this year's elections?
Yes.
You all support that? You all in support of that? Up until what happens?
Up until the Zondo Commission, the Commission of State Capture is complete, and those people are taken to task in prosecution. The PIC Commission and the NPA Commission.
Okay, so you're touching on the issues of corruption that are keeping us glued to our screens.
Precisely.
The ANC, are you going to take responsibility for this? And I want to go to the Alex Renewal Project here, which was launched by the former state president in 2001. It was meant to go on for 7 years, building 45,000 houses. It only built about 14,500 rand. Budget was 1.3 billion rand. At the end, it was 1.9 billion rand. The targets were shifted from 2005 to 2011 and then 2014. You haven't delivered. Do you take responsibility for this? Former city manager under ANC.
Well, I was a part of,
I know you were in the
chief of-
presidency under
Yes.
Thabo Mbeki, yes,
Yes.
so that's why
So
I'm
I
directing
was-
it at you before you became city manager.
Yes. And so the Alex Renewal Project was launched under Thabo Mbeki. And certainly I was there.
2001, yes.
Yeah, certainly I was there when that project was launched. And one of the key things that happened over the period of time is that certainly when I came to the city, I found that on the Alex Renewal Project, there were people there that were not doing the job. And so the first thing I did was the person that was there,
What was happening with the funds? When you say they were not doing the job, what was happening? Because there are allegations that many people were using it as a, for their career trajectory, that money was being siphoned off to the party itself. What did you find?
Well, I certainly found that what the person who was supposed to be managing it had become politically involved with in the community and was politicizing it, as opposed to doing it in an objective way.
Okay, we did invite, by the way, the ANC's representatives in housing and transport and so on. They didn't come. Nobody was available. But let's just move to the current mayor. The Alex Renewal Project, you say that's something that you have inherited. What is happening? How well are you doing? We know it's 2 years, but these needs are real. People have been promised houses for decades. Are you doing any better?
Well, Reddy, let me tell you what happened. June 2016, on the eve of the elections, I'm sure people of Alexander were aware. There was a big party, a memorandum of intent was signed with various the communities of Alexander, including the province and the city of Johannesburg. Upon taking over this government, I immediately went to Paul Mashatile as Minister of Copter to say, MEC, here is an agreement with the people of Alexander to deal with the housing backlog in the city of Johannesburg. You're a signatory as a province to fund this project. Up to today, I've tried the Premier, I've tried the new MEC of the Muilwa, the current one. They are refusing to really meet with us so that we can meet with the community of Alexander. Us as a city of Johannesburg, our multi-party government, we are committed to this agreement as much as we are not party to it.
What are you saying, that there was no financial planning around the promise that was made?
Because yes, the province was going to be the one to provide the funding, the city of Johannesburg to be the executor. We are ready to execute, but we want the province because they're the signatory to this agreement in June 2016. I'm sure you're aware about this. Up to today, they are refusing to meet with us so that they can provide the money.
Do you accept
as a new
this,
administration,
Benjamin?
we are ready to execute. You are aware about this agreement?
Yes, we are aware. I think maybe just to supplement on what the mayor is saying, I was part of the Alex Land Trust team for the past 10 years. My signature is in the statement of intent. But now the statement of intent is a mere agreement in principle, because we were to start negotiations of how to develop Alex. Now, the problem came because by that time the statement of intent was signed, President Zuma was still president, the ex-president. He had promised the people of Alex 16 billion. That's why they are not responding to the mayor, because they wanted that 16 billion to go into their pockets. They did not respond. Even today, they can't even account for those deeds that they did. They even squandered ARP money.
Okay, let's move on to Cape Town for a moment. Let's just move on to Cape Town for a moment. In Woodstock, in Cape Town, residents were pushed out of their homes by rising property rentals. The residents occupied Woodstock Hospital instead of moving to Wolfe Rivier. Mandisa from Difuna Ugwazi, Musa of the Social Justice Coalition. I mean, you supported the occupation of the hospital. We've just heard Maxwellian talking about land invasions. Benjamin says we need to postpone the elections. These are radical measures, and they speak to these desperate times in which we find ourselves. Why did you support those desperate moves?
At this point in time, I think people are acting out of need, complete need and desperation. While our political parties are talking about pipeline plans, people need places to stay. People need places to go. People need to access land. People need to access building. People need homes. And so it's in that context that people disrupt the status quo by occupying. And so long as the various levels of government don't themselves disrupt the replication of the apartheid city, because that's what we're seeing. The Wolfe Rivier is a recent example. A relocation camp isolated without access to the most basic of services was established in 2015. And that's what the government of the day is doing. And so while people can't trust this government to do and take on what they've committed to, these pipeline plans since '94, they're going to have to do what they can do to find a little piece of corner, a little parcel to stay. And so it's in that context that people occupy. Musa? Let's get the microphone to Musa. Musa?
And I definitely do support land invasions, but I think also we need to change the language around it.
Right.
Because naming is norming. If we want to talk about land invasions, we should start in 1652. We should talk about the Land Invasion Act of 1913. And we cannot criminalize that activity by naming it as something that's inappropriate and that is criminal in itself. And we're beginning to see a criminalization of informality without the context that South Africa actually exists around 3 nodes of economic development. And so we are going to have hundreds and thousands of people flocking to our cities because we've abandoned the rural landscape. And that is the context in which we are living in. And instead of pretending like informality does not exist or criminalizing informality, embed informality within your development goals. Because right now what we see is either informal settlements are being criminalized and are being charged with several evictions. I've been to Brett Heron several times around this issue. In fact, we once slept outside the Civic Centre in Cape Town to present the idea that people are being evicted and their materials are being confiscated and they're being left outside in the rain by the city of Cape Town. And the city came out with numbers saying that they destroyed 20,000 people's structures as to show that how active the anti-land invasion unit is and how white people must rest their anxieties that the city, it really is working to protect their properties.
I mean, we're being challenged here. Mike Sutton, we're being challenged. I'm surprised that you are clapping. We're being challenged here not to criminalize those who take land because they are homeless, right? Calling it land invasion, we're criminalizing it. We heard from Abahlali Basemijondolo that their efforts were also criminalized. So it's time to take over the land?
No, I don't think that their efforts were criminalized. And I think that Spoo and I had a fairly good relationship for that 10 years. It was often conflictual. At times he went to court. But it certainly was. He was in court one day. Well, he wasn't in court. His colleagues were. While he was sitting and talking to us. That sounds like a very nice relationship, taking each other to court. No, hold on. While they were taking us to court as a city, he was sitting in our offices around a negotiation there. Now, the point is that we've got to negotiate the settlement because we can't act as if there's one size fits all for all of this. There are communities who, tragically under apartheid, were forced to live in certain parts of the country.
Do those communities have a right to take the land now?
They have a right to make sure that they get potential land that they could in fact settle on.
But they get evicted all the time and city managers are there. You know that it's happening.
Partly because you take Gauteng as the example here. 52% of the households in Gauteng are 1 or 2 people. And what that represents to us is that they're coming from another home somewhere else. And the difficulty is you've got to manage that because our big problem that we have at the moment, water is one, sanitation is the other. And the difficulty is all of our existing bulks, as we would call them in those planning terms. So you can't just say, well, bulks are nothing. They're very important because in the end, we want decent sanitation for people. Alex and Sandton, the little I know about it, because we're doing some work looking at national level at the some 30-odd thousand projects occurring. And yes, there's some corruption, but there's a huge amount that is happening at the moment. But if you look at Alex and Sandton, ideally what we want to do, and we should be doing, is to say let's recast our cities and recast the bulk services that you need. You need bulk sanitation, bulk water, bulk electricity is a bit
But
easier
why
to
are we
deal
saying
with.
this after
And
25 years?
those are
Because you see,
happening.
that's where the frustration is, respectfully. I mean, we sometimes carry on as though we are the only country that is facing these problems that we're facing. There is an absence of political will. I've got a couple of examples in my head. You have Brazil, you have Toronto, they've done inclusionary housing. When it comes to rent control, you've got Seattle, you've got San Francisco, Berlin, and then even the United States has the Community Investment Act, which says that if the private sector comes in, they've got to give something back. Why are we talking about this as though we have never heard about it?
Let me use 3 or 4 examples in eThekwini. Firstly, we took all of the land that was under apartheid. Indian communities, white communities, black communities were separated by land. All of that land has now been developed for inclusionary housing. Secondly, we said that where people were existing in informal settlements, and there are probably 500 informal settlements in that city, they are allowed to remain there. Yes, there are cases where people are now rebuilding housing simply because they want to be closer to work. So those things are happening. You can't say it's not.
Well, I mean, in eThekwini, for instance, the government of the day has made it clear that while it is still in power, none of abahlali baseMjondolo will ever benefit from this government. So they have evicted many families, and in all these evictions, none of them have been carried out with a court order. All these evictions have been unlawful and of course violent. I mean, we've lost lives within abahlali communities due to the city's action. Of lately, the city has gone on to spend almost 28 million rand to buy Caspers. These are military vehicles that it indicates that the city has no will or intention to engage meaningfully with the community. Instead, they want to buy Caspers, which are military vehicles, to make sure that the poor people have no place in our cities.
And it speaks to what you were talking about earlier. I mean, Maxwellian, let's talk about this. You wrote the ANC's urban development program. I think that was about 30 years ago, 25 years ago. You were part of the making of the policy. Why are we here now?
You're referring to the Integrated Urban Development Framework, which was the first urban development policy since 94, and it basically does envisage significant integration. However, that is a policy framework which has to translate into planning frameworks, which in turn are superimposed on top of the dynamics of the property market. And where are the conversations taking place between the social movements, local government, and the financial institutions who hold the security on that land? There is also a large quantity of public land, and that Integrated Urban Development Framework refers very specifically to the need for government to take the lead in making available large swathes of public land in our cities in order to use that as leverage to bring poor people into the city. Unfortunately, that is not happening fast enough. And people are taking the power into their own hands and identifying that public land and invading it. And that's forcing the hand of the owners of that land, whether it's parastatals or local government or provincial government, to now act. So, you know, how's that going to pan itself out?
Why are the financiers, the property developers, the banks, why are they so powerful in all of this?
Well, they have issued loans to state-owned companies, to private developers, with the land as security. And that land acts as security for a large flow of financial capital through our cities. So it's a very difficult problem to deal with. One of the stress points that creates results in land invasions that then force people to face the reality. But there may be other ways of doing it through area-based negotiations between the owners of properties, the financiers, social movements, and local government.
We'll talk about that in just a moment. I think we do have an example. Brett, you wanted to come in there?
Yeah, I wanted to just say that we mustn't assume that the private developer and the financiers are not interested in inclusionary housing. At the same time as we were running this Woodstock Salt River program, I was leading an engagement with housing activists, academics, private developers, the local government planning officials, and we actually got to a very, very close point of landing an inclusionary housing policy that private sector was fully on board with. And I left on the 1st of November 2018, and I don't think that work has continued, but for over a period of about a year, we engaged with Reclaim the City in Ndufunu Kwazi academics from UCT, private developers from the Western Cape Property Developers Forum, public lawyers, and we actually found common ground. So it is possible to do it. It takes courage, it takes leadership, and it takes action.
Okay, let's just pause there for just a moment. When we return, we look at an innovative model of housing development in Stellenbosch, where financial directors actually live right next door to teachers and farm workers. Sounds hard to believe? Don't go away. Welcome back. Welcome back. You're watching the big debate on cities, race and inequality. We've got residents from different parts of South Africa. They've got something to say to our panelists today. Nontutuzelo. Put the microphone in front of your mouth. Yeah.
Nontutuzelo mbangela othethayo osuka apha kwi-Inner City Federation ohlala apha edolophini embindini wedolophu. Mna okwami enducelayo ngoba bingumbuzo eqaleni kodwa ngoseyisicelo nakophi na urhulumente ozawuphatha sicela iRDP apha edolophini.
RDP houses, a simple request. RDP houses here in town. And Mamnon Tutuzelo, I don't know if you saw our President Cyril Ramaphosa was in Diepsloot and he was boasting about the 3.6 million RDP houses that have been built, but the target was much higher than that. He made all sorts of promises and he's been traversing the length and breadth of Johannesburg. RDP houses in the city.
Absolutely, ma'am, I support you 200%. When I took over this administration, the first meeting which I had with the Premier, I said, the Premier, we're sitting with derelict, abandoned buildings in the city of Johannesburg. Please, this money grants that you are giving us to build houses 60, 80 kilometers away from this inner city. Please allow us as a city. We've got buildings that are owned by the city. Please allow us to build our people to live and work in the inner city. Unfortunately, I even tried the Minister of Housing. Unfortunately, there's no interest. They are saying I must build people houses 280 kilometers away from the city. And unfortunately, something that we as a new multi-party government, we don't accept. We agree our people need to be built houses in the inner city and the other
National
places.
Department of Human Settlements and Housing. I mean, 2.3 million rand, 3.3 million houses a backlog, I believe, about 170, growing by 178,000 a year. And we also know in the budget of 2018, the budget was cut by 10 billion. It doesn't look as if the promises that were made will be fulfilled.
Really, I think what we must do is not deal with the issue of funding, but I think it's important to note, in relation to housing and human settlements, we, for example, give cities, the 8 largest cities, we give them annually 10 billion rand to be able to utilize for land, provision of services, particularly aimed at informal settlement households. That is there. So, for example, I think it's important to note, last year, the city of Joburg returned 357 million of the USDG, the Urban Settlements Development Grant, which we provide for that. The other issue is that it's, well, I don't want to make it a city of Joburg specific.
So national is blaming cities and cities are blaming national.
I'll come back to that. The issue is that we have, and I think the policies are clear, the frameworks are clear. I think what Mark's indicated is where this all comes apart is the planning. And that planning is particularly vested within a provincial and a municipal sphere.
We'll pick up on that in just a moment. We have to take a commercial break. We'll be back in just a moment. Welcome back to the big debate on cities, racism and inequality. Now, we asked you whether it's time to bring affordable housing into all our neighborhoods. Some of you said that you are worried about the impact on your home values, but 66% of you said, let's go ahead and do it now. Now, let's hear the views of our studio audience. Also, you from Diepsloot, you have a comment or a question, yeah?
My question is, in Diepsloot, we need a road, like ambulance can reach our area. What will be done about this? Because some of the areas in the Scotta camp, the ambulance can't reach us. Yes. And then say, if somebody is sick, we have to take him,
Indeed.
hold him, and take him to the street, and that is the distance. Maybe it's at night, and sometimes you are scared, and then there's criminals, and then they're rajing us.
Let's get an answer here. Diepsloot, always on the periphery. We know that it took 8 years for the police station there to be opened. We know there's a little girl who drowned many years ago on her way from school because of flash floods when activists had been calling for bridges to be built. What are you doing for people
Well,
of
I
Diepsloot?
think, Reddy, it's precisely the reason today, I mean, in politics. I think when I took over the city of Johannesburg, Trevor would know as a former city manager, over 200 informal settlements, some of them with no facilities whatsoever, nothing. So it's not just really a Diepsloot problem, it's a citywide problem. 2 weeks ago, for the first time, we've also, as part of fast-tracking delivery of housing and decent accommodation for our people, we launched in Zandspruit the site and services, where we're going to be providing up to 7,000 sites. We provide services like water, everything, streets. We give people title deeds. Tomorrow in Region G, I'm launching the second one, where people can build
is on your
so
radar.
that people can have proper accommodation. Because what she's talking about, it's something that I'm worried about, where people are living on top of one another with
African
no roads,
diaspora?
no infrastructure.
You have a comment, question?
I have a comment. Actually, we engaged with Mashaba within these 100 days in the office. I heard them mentioning about criminals taking over the properties in the city. And I wonder what he's trying to say. Is it proving that criminals are hijacking the properties, or hugely corruption is playing a major role out of the whole game? So I want him to explain.
Mayor, are you blaming
criminals
foreign
are
migrants?
hijacking
You've come under
the
fire
properties.
for your
What does that
comments
mean?
on foreign migrants. Who are the criminals? What are you saying?
Well, we've got local and foreign nationals undocumented. I've been asking for support from national government, Home Affairs in particular. We cannot really be in a situation where we've got, we do raids of these properties, up to some of them, up to 80% of people that we find in here are undocumented people. And we are saying this cannot really be. We've got to close our borders.
Who are you
make
taking
sure
your
that-
fight to, though?
What?
Because who are you taking your fight? To whom are you taking your fight?
To
Because
Home Affairs,
criminalize-
because they are the ones Constitution has empowered to ensure that people come into this country legally, and when they're here, they must
you've got
respect
something to say
our
about
laws.
that. We'll talk about it in just a moment. I could see you shifting in your chair. We'll get there in just a moment, and you as well, Musa. We'll get there in just a moment. When we return, we get the last word from our panel in this half of the debate. Don't go away and don't miss the second half, or rather the second hour of our debate coming up shortly on SABC News YouTube channel, or visit bigdebate.live/watch. Also watch SABC2 at 10 p.m. on Wednesday night to catch the repeat of the full 2 hours. See you in a moment. Hello again from the Big Debate live in Johannesburg. We're talking about cities. We have an unprecedented gathering tonight of former city managers and present mayors. Let's see what they've learned in this half of our debate. We'll continue, of course, just to get the impressions, to get more answers to the questions that have been asked. But a big issue here is the inner city and criminalizing people who've come to South Africa who are desperate. We are signatories to all sorts of international conventions about treating people who are coming here for better opportunities. What do you make of what is happening? The mayor says 80% of people that they find in the inner city buildings are undocumented.
First of all, that's not true. But second of all, their action has been unlawful. We've challenged it in court. They haven't opposed that action because they know that they have no right to come into people's homes at 2 a.m. in the morning, have infants standing on the street in the coldest day in winter, in the winter of Joburg. That's unlawful. But Mr. Mashaba, you must understand, in this country, the Constitution is supreme. And our Constitution demands that you treat every person with respect, including every single resident of the inner city, regardless of whether they are documented. But I think you can't simply assume, if you look at me, if I'm documented or not, which is simply your assumption. You simply assume that 80% of the inner city residents are undocumented. In a reality where, I'd like to just call some names in this room. Ingelosi House, they are waiting for you to house them. 100% of them are South Africans, you haven't housed them. Kiribili, they are 90% South Africans, you haven't housed them. You are again asking for another postponement to push another court order. Mr. Mashaba, this is unacceptable. You must comply with the law in as much as you expect everybody else to comply with the law. And these raids, I promise you, there's no way a court in this country is going to rule that you should be allowed to search somebody's home without a warrant.
We're going to give the mayor a chance to respond in our next segment. Don't go away. The debate is certainly heated. Thanks for watching. Okay, so the mayor's claim that 80% of people that they find in the inner city are undocumented has just been disputed and challenged. Mayor, how do you respond to this?
Well,
Are there violations of human rights, of African migrants? What are we doing?
You know, fortunate enough, I think the constitution of this country is here to defend, including our own people. I'd really like to see to my dear sister lawyer to actually have the same passion for our own people who are suffering today, live under conditions that are a shame. So for her to really come out with us, so she must show the same vigor to really fight for our own people.
But that whole binary between South African suffering versus a Zimbabwean suffering, what we're talking about here are human lives.
Absolutely.
And we are using bureaucracy, officialdom, paperwork to keep people impoverished. And what concerns me is that there seems to be an aversion to African migrants rather than others who are of a different hue, who are living in our city. That's not right.
Really, far from the truth. If you look at people coming from all over the world, to be from Pakistan, from everywhere else, I think this whole thing of actually taking that undocumented and illegal foreigners Africans, actually it's an insult to the African people. We've got foreign nationals. You can go into any township, you can enter any community, people from India, people from everywhere else. So I think undocumented and foreign nationals who are illegally here, it's not only Africans. And I think people who are actually benefiting out of this criminality that will defend this.
I think the problem here, I don't know how you see it, the problem here is the lack of services, the lack of delivery. And it feels to me, being a South African, that we've gone out of our way to find some scapegoats. We've gone out of our way to use certain people and situation as a subterfuge for our own failures.
And I think we really have to stop entertaining Amin Mashaba's xenophobia and how he diverts.
Well, we're challenging it.
And how he diverts every single conversation back to foreign national criminality, where he's actually failed where foreign national presence didn't even exist. Like Unomzamo gave him a good example of a place where only just South Africans live. And this our people and their people, and this binary and creating and sowing division in this country that actually puts people's lives at risk.
What do you say from African Cities Network? What do you say? How do you read the situation?
So really, I'm hoping that we can take a step back, and the view of our organization as a research organization is to say that these issues are systemic. Mm-hmm. They're not about individuals. They're not about single institutions. Because if you look at the history of South Africa, not a single city or a single province in this country has been able to drive the transformation that is enshrined in our constitution and in all of our policy documents. So we've been forcing ourselves to ask the question, what is really at play here?
What is at play?
I think one of the things that we're missing in this conversation, it's not everything, but it's certainly one of the things, is the financial legislation that underpins the way that decisions are being made in government is not being scrutinized, and all we're doing is having an infighting where we're pushing people into corners. But the real thing at play here, and what our research is uncovering, is that in fact, as cities face greater financial pressures, and we all know what's happening in the electricity and water space, so which were previously cities' cash cows, their increasing revenue stream is from property rates. And property rates is based on value. It's a percentage of the value that you get allocated as a city. The incentive then is never to accommodate poor people who aren't able to pay rates in the most valuable properties in the city. So there's a systemic power that's pushing cities to act in a different way.
So as a former city manager, is that why there's a focus on your Zimbali, your Shaka, Point, and so on? That's where the money's going to come from?
No, I mean, you've got to combine a variety of things. We had a 10-year financial model that we developed in the city that looks at economic issues, those are that, social issues, that's around housing, environmental issues. And you've got to get the right mix of that. Now, at times you push too far in the social direction and you'll end up exactly with that kind of problem there. So the first thing is that the major cities in South Africa, and I think we must understand they do measure themselves against other international cities too, and I think they're doing a really good job there. We've got a long way to go. There's no doubt in our minds, but they are doing a lot to try and get that balance between economic, social, and environmental issues right. The environmental is hugely important for us, and that's why I used the example earlier on of a Gautrain. Point is that you've got to get people off the road. You can't have South Africans, when they start earning 7,000 to 8,000 rand a month, the first thing that they think about is buying a car. We've got to create a society where you don't do that. You don't do that in other areas, and so we're saying let's move in that direction.
But even the Gautrain is a bit problematic for me. Let's look at the subsidies on public transport. Yeah. For every Gautrain passenger, the subsidy for that passenger is about 60 rand. But if you are traveling on municipal buses, it's between 16 rand and 25 rand per passenger. PADCO and BRT between 11 rand and 16 rand, I think. And then for PADCO passenger, just over 3 rand. And for the taxi industry, nothing. So we've built houses, or not built houses. We've got informal settlements out in the periphery where people are 40 kilometers away from work. They spend 40 to 50% of their budget on transport. But the transport mode that they use, that carries 67% of the workforce, is not subsidized. That doesn't look right.
That's not right. And I do think that that is a matter that's being addressed quite well. I sent 30 of our biggest warlords, if I could call it that, in the taxi industry off to Colombia to go and begin to understand how they could move beyond as a taxi industry. And they were, in the sense that it took us 18 months to put the guns down outside the negotiations in order that we can make sure that we're beginning to build. We then made sure that they took over the inner city bus service, which is what they're running now, to move beyond being a taxi industry. But I completely agree that we've got to begin to make sure that we're subsidizing fairly and properly. But the point is that ultimately you've got to have a range of those services. You've got to stop particularly middle-class vehicles off the road. We've got too much of that occurring, right through to making sure that we've got to get our cities knitted correctly. So I'm saying it's a complex set of issues, and I completely agree the taxi industry should be subsidized. We've got to develop a model that's beyond just recapitalizing.
Well, the Minister of Transport was also invited, the Minister of Housing, just so they could speak to each other. But as we said, they sent you, Mike, to come and answer their question on their behalf.
Thank you, Ridi. So
tell us where you're from again.
Yes, my name is Vuyiswa Muchekwani. I represent the South African Institute of Black Property Practitioners. And our members are private sector property developers and practitioners. But of course, we are trying to drive transformation in a heavily untransformed property sector, and a sector where black people, as we know, continue to not own property and not participate in the property market. And one of the key challenges, and I think it's coming through in a lot of the comments today, is around development planning. There is no commitment to implementing any of the policies that exist, those that do exist, but even many that do exist are not fit for purpose. As a country, we have been built around segregationist thinking. We need to stop talking about affordable housing. Why is it that poor people live in housing, but rich people live in suburbs? It can't be. We need to start talking about inclusive development, and every aspect of development, every aspect of how we develop and think through our cities needs to be inclusive. We are one country. We don't build for the poor and build for the rich. We build for one society. So what I'm saying is that when we build, we cannot continue to build these large, mammoth, gated communities, these mega, waterfall developments.
How much land can one person need?
I mean, there's 8 billion rand worth of investment that has gone into that development. Not one unit, not one shop, not one school has been built for the local community. We act surprised that we have poor people in this country. So this is why we have land invasions, because we don't plan for the poor. We need to plan for the poor at stage 1 of our development planning process.
I mean, middle to high income earners, people who live in suburbs. I'm one of them. We live in suburbs. The conversations are wrong in our country. The idea of inclusionary housing, people see it as taking away from, as compromising property rights. How do we achieve this mind shift? Who leads that process?
Yeah, I mean, I really believe that, again, that it's a political leadership failure. Communities are open to integrated developments and to also respond to the South African Cities Network. This project that was blocked by the DA caucus in Salt River would have been a mixed-use, mixed-income, tenure-blind development. So it would have generated rates for the city, it would have accommodated social housing, it would have accommodated student housing, and it would have accommodated commercial uses. So you would have had a integrated development, exactly as the lady was just saying, on one site, close to the city, on public-owned land. And unless we change our attitude to public land and regard it as a public good that is there to serve the public, and one of our greatest needs is the housing deficit, and so we have to regard public land as something that can assist us to address the housing deficit and the integration.
But Brett, you know, my heart breaks. I'm standing here thinking, are we then all activists here? It's kind of sad for me when people who are running the city, and you were with Mayor Peter, can't even get their own ideas through, can't inspire their colleagues to do the right thing, because now we're speaking it with you being on the other side. What are the obstacles?
You know, I think we have to start looking at, and we have elections coming up, and then I'm going to go a little bit into electioneering. We have to stop looking at, as South Africans, at blindly just, I always vote this and I always vote that. You have to really look for leadership that is willing to stand up and do something. And I'm telling you that there are good leaders in South Africa who will take action and will make the change. And you just need to vote for them.
Are you inspired?
You know, to be honest, I'm not. And I say this as somebody who does trust Brett Heron's willingness to achieve these kinds of projects that he's articulated. However, if you have been in government for as long as you and Patricia de Lille have been, how will we be swayed that this will now happen now that you're outside of the party, the ruling party in Cape Town? And I think it's a failure of, in the way that the system works, that if somebody is willing to use its land, the city's land, to transform the city, that instead of pushing and really trying to transform the system, they step out. I think that's a problem. I think it's a problem that we're sitting here with national and city government in conversation and deflecting, because that means to me that you've not come together around solutions and urgently prioritizing them. Something that's creative, something that's going to really change the way that our apartheid spatial city actually looks like. And for me, what it means is a need to prioritize the redistribution of state land now.
Your comments?
Okay, thank you very much. My name is Temba Mafuya. I'm representing Transformer SA.
Can you stand up, please, so we can see you? Yes, you are from Alex, yeah?
We are from Alex.
You were singing on the big debate the last time. You were singing Tumani. So are you too mad? What's been happening since we last spoke?
Nothing has been happening. We saw the Alexander shutdown has been imaged there, and then the mayor didn't want to come and say he blames the ANC. But over and above that, we see that our government doesn't have the master plan. Because if the government have the master plan, we didn't have the problem that we're having in Alexander, because now Alexander doesn't have space. What we must do in Alexander, we must do their high-right public housing that is belong to the government. And then we also, because we are near Sandton, those who are in the middle class, we can build the affordable houses for them. So they call it low-cost housing, the JOSCO ones. And then when you look at the JOSCO, there's many criminal elements that has been happening in JOSCO, and then no one has actually been hand accountable of that thing. Okay. The government is not ready to be hand accountable. I don't know what Mr. Mayor
Mr. Mayor, I know that you are on public record talking about some of the corruption that you have found, talking about the malfeasance that you found. We're not seeing any serious and high-profile prosecutions. So it's kind of hard to have sympathy for you when you say that there are certain obstacles in your way and you can't provide these things because of the people that are still in the department. What's your excuse, apart from having been there just 2 years? We know that, but what's your excuse?
Well, it's unfortunate the radius you are aware, I run a municipality with certain constitutional competencies. I don't have prosecutorial competency. I don't have prisons. I can assure you, I'm really asking the national government, give us as a test as the city of Johannesburg. Give us prosecutorial responsibility. Give us prisons. I can tell you our prisons will be half available.
The city wants to run prisons. The city wants to run prisons. Okay, where's the microphone?
Yeah.
Where's the microphone? Who's got the microphone? Sir, you speak in the meantime. Speak.
Well, my name is Sufri Kletus. I'm a foreigner. I'm studying with the University of Johannesburg, masters, and we become scapegoats. as a member of the African Diaspora Forum too, we want to distance ourselves from any foreigner who is involved in criminal activity. And we are challenging the DA and of course the South African government to bring them to book. Because as a student who is paying a lot to study here, we love this country. But I am a victim in the buses, in the roads. I can be killed at any time. But I am paying taxes and I'm coming from far. And we want to build. So we are calling on the South African government to invite us into their building because we can identify, if they have the list, those foreigners who are taking the country back. But we shouldn't become scapegoats because Africa was there for South Africa during the back days.
But, you know, I really do appreciate what you're saying, but it pains me that you feel you have to take responsibility for every African migrant or national who's here in South Africa. I think that I'd be ashamed to live in a country where we're pointing at African nationals and saying, you take responsibility for what your people are doing. These binaries of you people and our people, I just think that is going to take our country backward, and I'd like to live in a more welcoming and just society than that.
My name is Thabo Mopasi. I come from Alexander Township. The way the situation is desperate in Alexander, people are building on top of graves, number one. And secondly, they are also closing the river, Joskei River. They are building on top of the banks of the river. And where does this soil come from? That is closing Joskei River. It comes from Sandton City. And who's paying for that sand to be deposited inside the river? It's big business. Big business doesn't want to take part in Alex problems. They're distancing themselves. But the issue that I wanted to challenge with, besides Herman Mashaba, the mayor, being a scapegoat here, Trevor Fowler is responsible for all this mess. Trevor, you are.
Okay, wait. Tell me why
the reason why I'm saying Trevor Fowler is responsible for this mess, precisely because of he worked with the presidency during Thabo Mbiki's era. And secondly, he was the MEC for province and local government. And he worked also as a city manager. He knows everything that we are having today is a problem in the city of Johannesburg. He knows everything that the people of Alexander are suffering. And he's speaking very less. He must answer today.
Trevor, that's fair, right? Hold on, let's give him a chance to speak. That's fair, right? You were in the presidency, you were in the province, you were in the city. And let me pick on you once more. You were also with Murray and Roberts. That's a private sector. I know they are busy with infrastructure, engineering. They built that bridge that collapsed on Grayston Drive and killed 2 people, right? I know you didn't do that, but the point of the matter is that you've kind of been present in all these spheres that are responsible for the desperation that we're seeing today. How do you plead?
Oh, absolutely. So one of the first things that let me
let him
talk
answer.
About. Around, first of all, around in Alex, we, when I was there, negotiated with the Alex Alpoa, the Alex land property owners, who had an interdict to develop Alex, which they had there for some time. So we negotiated with them to lift that interdict so that we can, in fact, invest in multi-story buildings. Now that happened close to the end of my term, and we didn't. It wasn't implemented because I wasn't there. But that was one of the key things that we looked at. The point that's being made about being in the presidency, being MEC for local government. Of course, I'm aware of the problems in Alex, and one of the key areas is that what we've had to address is this question of how do you ensure that the people of Alex are served in a way that addresses the challenges.
So you failed.
No, let me finish. Let me finish. One of the key things is that when I was there, we looked at the number of people who go from Alex to Sandton, it's about 10,000 people a day, and many of them walk. And we put in a new pedestrian bridge to enable that, but also...
Okay, wait. Let him finish
right.
quickly, Trevor, before we go to...
Also, there was a new bridge for buses to go over that was built. Those were two things that were done. The other was really to try to negotiate to ensure that we are able to build these high-rises.
Can we integrate cities with a couple of bridges?
No, I'm not. I think that's an unfair question.
But the people responded to you asking...
No, we were talking about...
saying that you've built the bridges, right?
Yes, but I was saying it's for a particular purpose. The main way to address this is really to ensure that we have high-rise development in Alex, to enable people the density that is there.
So I guess the question was more of why didn't it happen? Hold on. Why didn't it happen? Because we have the plan, we have the policy. Why didn't that happen? You're saying it's because you left before it could take off.
Yes.
That's the answer. He left office before that time. Quickly.
I think...
You want the microphone?
Mr. Fowler must be fair to himself and say to the people of South Africa, I have failed and I am sorry. Because the statement that he just posed now to say he negotiated, no, he tried to negotiate and he was not successful. Hence, we even see the interdict still standing even today. But now the bone of contention is here.
Will you accept, though, that it's not just about Trevor, it's about the ANC, it's about the system, Precisely. It's about who was running the city at that time.
There. The bone of contention here is there to say, we as South Africans needs now to stop behaving as subjects of the country. We need to act as citizens of the country. Because one thing, in conclusion, what we need to do is there to say, we have put faith in those that took over after apartheid, but they have slowly moved. Now let's remove them and put people that are going to work for us.
Thank you very much.
Carry on, sir.
Thank you very much. It's very sad to see...
Speak up, please.
It's very sad to see 25 years after democracy, even our mothers begging for RDPs. I think our people deserve spacious houses with nice gardens and even nice things such as swimming pools. Now, to get to the point of Mr. Mashaba spoke about how they sell these properties to private companies and then make sure that they monitor the rates, and then these companies are BEE inclusive and so forth. But the question is, why sell it like that in the first place? I mean, why can't you say, okay, we'll give you this land, but then you make sure that you split the profits, which can then be channeled into improving the lives of our people. So it is said that these political parties are funded by these private companies, so maybe that's why we're seeing the problems that we are seeing. I mean, there has been... Yes, there has been proposed ideas such as the land value capture or the land value tax. So why aren't we hearing more about that?
Okay, I want the mayor to respond to that in just a moment, but I do want to go to a Cape Town example. If I remember correctly, the Foreshore Freeway project, some of the protest was around land that was sold to Growth Point at, if I remember correctly, 82 million rand, when it was worth far more than that. And what he's saying is not so far-fetched. If we were to open up the books of the political parties, the law has just been signed, maybe we'll find out that a lot of these financiers and property developers are funding these political parties. Cape Town, tell us about that.
Well, I mean, I agree that we need to open political parties funding, and I do suspect that a lot of the pressure that I got personally was around party political funding, because land is very valuable in the city centre of Cape Town, and for it to be used for a public purpose removes the opportunity to sell it. There was a piece of land that was sold right in the city centre, where the development rights, the reason why it was sold under value was because the development rights were advertised as being less than what they really were. So it was advertised as having 19,000 square meters of developable rights, when in fact it had 46,000 square meters of developable rights. So the property developer who purchased it got a massive discount.
Let's be clear with what you're saying now. are you saying that it is very possible that some of those people who got discount, some of those people who were sold the land may be financing the Democratic Alliance, maybe donating to the Democratic Alliance in Cape Town?
What I'm saying is that I'm convinced that there are property developers who are financing the Democratic Alliance, and that is why I got pushback on the properties that I had identified for public housing. I'm not saying that growth point in particular, but it is a problem when a piece of land, let me put it this way, that piece of land in the city centre was undervalued by about 60%. When I wanted to take the Salt River Market project to council for approval to be disposed of, and when they blocked it, the property management department inflated the value from 2014 to 2018 by 600%, from 14 million to 118 million rand. As soon as it became a property that we would use for a public good, its value went from 14 million to 118 million rand, and I think it was to undermine the viability of the scheme.
Let's go to Joburg. I mean, just to respond to what the gentleman said firstly, and I imagine if this can happen in Cape Town, it can happen in Johannesburg.
Well,
are the financiers and property developers that you're talking about also in the same category? And you, as the mayor, what is your vision? Land for commercial rather than the social good?
Fortunate enough for us as a city of Johannesburg, our inner city rejuvenation plan is very clear about this, that we're not selling any land to anyone. So any developer, because as a city, we've got a housing backlog of over 300,000, and we don't have the money. So what we are saying is we are leasing this land will always belong to the city.
Nomzamo, what is
It's being leased for 50 years, right? 50 years. It's as good as a sale. In fact, before 1990, for black Africans, you could only own for 100 years. So half that time, Mr. Mashaba is giving out to private developers. The problem is that if ever we're going to address the backlog, if we're going to address housing for people in the inner city, you can't give it to private developers. It has to be public land that is publicly owned and publicly run. Yes. And if you can't get that right, we are here to, and I'm sure Mark is available as well, to say, how do we make sure that we're actually able to manage that land as the city, as the state, to make sure that we can actually address the issue?
I think, with due respect, I think as a legal person, you need to start getting some issues around financing. The city of Johannesburg's balance sheet, you know it. You know the balance sheet of this country. We're sitting with a massive housing backlog. The government of this country does not have the money. That is why we're leveraging on this land to make sure that we can build houses.
You've got sympathies for that? You've got sympathies? The government doesn't? People don't believe that the government doesn't have money. I mean, those of you, money is there, it's not going where it's supposed to go. What do you say, Mike?
Colleagues, no. I think that we've got to be realistic. I think that it's not an either-or equation. Let me use an example. There are 18 dams that we're presently looking at in very rural parts of our country. They've been built by national government because that's their responsibility. Places like OR Tambo, Alfred Nzo, Ugu district. Now, in each of those, our estimate for 5 of the dams is something like 10 billion rand needed just for the reticulation to take that water from the dam through to those communities. Not even looking at whether they can afford to pay for water, just the idea of taking it there. So it's not an issue that you can put up your hand and say there's plenty of money in the bank. The reality at the moment is that at the moment of the 1.5 trillion rand that is the national fiscus, municipalities get about 134 billion rand. Now, if you look at that, that's coming from national government. They obviously also get property rates, comes into that equation. Now, if you're saying for 5 communities, you're going to need 9 billion rand just to provide reticulation, that's often a lot cheaper than the kind of bulks that I was talking about. So we have to understand that it's not an issue. I'm sure that we'll hear in the housing case, when I was building what ended up being 150,000 houses in eThekwini, and not me personally, I had great teams doing it, over a 10-year period, 15,000 odd a year, it was cheaper to build those houses then than it is today. So the result is with the same amount of money, you get less housing. And I think we've got to factor in that these are not things that there's an instantaneous solution that suddenly everything will happen in one go there. The banks are an issue. I've worked a bit with the city manager in Tshwane recently, and the difficulty there is that post-apartheid, you really had white banks prepared only to fund institutions. You spoke about a Shaka Marine world. We wanted to bring the private sector into that, but because it was in the inner city, they said no South African bank was prepared to give us about 10 million rand is all we wanted from them, a pittance. We had to get Citibank from New York to come and fund that. Now, that problem, if you look at the eastern side of Tshwane, you have massively wealthy properties going to the right. We need to shift that and make sure that the development is towards Attridgeville and then up towards Babelege in areas like that.
But the property
That's
developers,
what we have
the
to
financiers, the property developers, they're busy in townships as well, busy building shopping malls, right?
Yes.
The shopping malls are coming up at a furious
And
pace,
that's the
but not
problem.
a roof over people's heads.
Exactly.
Thank you, Reddy Shabi. First of all, I just want to say that it is very dangerous to have leaders such as Herman Mashaba speaking the way he's speaking in the instances of when it comes to foreigners, because it sparks xenophobic attacks that we're currently facing. Number two, Mr. Brett speaks on the issue of housing and how we can move into the urban areas. So my question to him is, number one, how do we ensure, like for instance, when it comes to, they call it the Absa village, where people are being moved and vacated from their houses by the red ants. Number one, how do we ensure, if we're going to look at urban housing, how do we ensure that these people that are still in informal settlement, that they have title deeds, and they continue to stay there while we are still ensuring that, what is the process, basically?
I think Herman Mashaba must respond to what you said to him, and then Pret, you'll respond. Yeah? Give us the microphone.
Well, it's actually very unfortunate for anyone to really stop us as South Africans to talk about this issue of undocumented people. This debate is not going to go away for as long as we tackle it. Home Affairs has got a constitutional responsibility to make sure that people come into this country legally. So no one is going. No one is going to stop us, or me in particular, for addressing it within the constitutional framework. We are going to debate this matter. We're going to hold the national government accountable, because we cannot live in a country where people just come in and out without knowing who they are, and we say it's xenophobic.
But do we see...
it's not negotiable, this matter.
But we see in the United States, as soon as the President Trump says something acerbic against the other, people act on that. And you're not alone in this commentary around African migrants and nationals.
Please, let's forget about, let's not really...
you said foreign. Foreign. Okay, even that word foreign is a bit problematic for me, but that's a philosophical debate for another day. Even the President made some commentary around that. The fact of the matter is that you do seem to have something in common with the ANC when it comes to nationals from outside. And it is...
No, ANC, when I raised this issue on the 1st of December 2016, they called me xenophobic, they call all sorts of names. But I can tell you, the more they try and insult me, the more I get determined to resolve this matter.
The more xenophobic you become.
More xenophobic. Who's got the microphone? Carry on, please. Okay, he had it first. Please carry on, sir. Brett, you wanted to say something? We are on first name basis here. Brett, I'm coming to you in just a moment. Trevor, I'm coming to you. Nomzamo, Mike, coming to you.
This is Mzwandile Mkhwani from Freedom Park. I'd like to second his statement, Sagamama, when he's saying we should build RDPs in town. But we need hygienically RDPs. You don't need toilets next to the kitchen. That's not hygienical. And I want to ask this question especially to Herman Mashaba. What are you doing about Southern Farm? There's a project that's called Southern Farm. 27 billion has been issued from the province to the city to build Southern Farm. But Herman is delaying it because of his things. ANC is going to campaign with it. Please, what are you doing about Southern Farm?
Okay. Carry on.
Reddy, I think this matter is not a philosophical matter. So if you're talking about 27 billion rands made available to the city of Johannesburg, please show me where is the money.
Where is it? Do you have the money flow of South Hills?
27 billion rands.
You don't have such a figure. You don't have such money from national.
People mustn't come out with philosophical.
Are you saying that's not factual?
The housing subsidy for the city of Johannesburg, the books are there, 245 million rands for the entire city. 245 million.
But the gentleman raised something else that's important around, we can build low-cost housing, but we've got to affirm people's dignity. We know that we've got some RDP houses that fell apart. In Durban, we had those as well. And I mention again the Mpisanis. I'm not picking on them, but it is factual matters. They got contracts that are questionable, and you were accused of awarding housing contracts, and the houses were built and some of them were not of good quality.
It's not true in their case, and I'll explain it very simply. That particular housing scheme, which was in an area which you don't get in Gauteng, on land as you enter Umlazi, which was terrible. It was firstly given to LTE. They, in fact, couldn't develop that land. After spending 70 million rand, they gave it over. Secondly, to another contractor, who then tried it for another 8 months. Eventually, the Mpisani took that on and built something like 4,000 to 5,000 units. None of those units. The only ones, there have been so many investigations by the DA and others into those, none of those was poorly constructed. The problem with that first housing scheme was that, and it doesn't happen today, when I got there we changed policy, was that what happened was that when houses were provided by provincial housing, they were provided without any bulks being in place. Now we make sure that the bulks are there, electricity, water, sanitation, and then you build the house. So those earlier houses that were built were structurally sound and fine. The problem was they didn't have services because the city had not. Because, as I said earlier, when you're trying to put bulks in areas which in fact are away from the bulks, it's a hugely costly. It takes you something like 10 years, 10 to 15 years to do a water treatment plant, for example. So these are not things you click your fingers and suddenly say, we've got water treatment, sanitation systems that are in place there. So in their case, I defended that because that contract was signed before I got there, but certainly I defended it. And here's a black woman who is taken on because she might enjoy luxurious lifestyle or whatever. That's her business. That's an understatement. But she was the only black woman who was a developer who developed houses cheaper than anyone else in that city has produced, of those 150,000.
You want to answer that question? Okay, well, actually it was asked to you earlier. We're going to go to a commercial break very quickly, please.
So very quickly, I think part of the problem is not only are informal settlements regarded, are criminalized, but they're also regarded as some kind of temporary inconvenience. And so they get temporary basic services. So we have to change our attitude to urbanization and informality. In 2050, 80% of South Africans will live in towns and cities, and our towns and cities are not ready for it. And one of the things we have to do, and you mentioned South America at the beginning, is you have to give real security of tenure. You have to say to engage with the community and say, we can transfer this land to you, you can own it, we'll service it, and then you can develop it yourself as well. So we need to look at different ownership models of informal settlements and not regard them either as criminal or as temporary.
All right, I told you earlier in our first hour that we have an innovative housing project. We want to share it with you after the commercial break. Welcome back to the big debate on cities, race and inequality. Before we carry on, I've got something to do. I beg your pardon, Mike. I'm not going to explain myself, but this is what's going to happen. Make of that what you like. South Africa's cities are divided and housing delivery has slowed following a budget cut of 10 billion in 2018. Now the housing backlog, which sits at 2.3 million, is increasing at a rate of about 180,000 houses a year. So more people are becoming homeless year on year. But there is some good news. Watch this. So despite housing budget cuts, one community in Stellenbosch managed to build quality housing. They grow their own food, they generate their own electricity, but most importantly, they made a third of the units available to buy at 20,000 rand each for people like farm workers, teachers and others. Some low-income residents found themselves living next to finance directors and professors.
Die 6de Januarie het ek in my huis getrek. Dis my eerste huis na 38 jaar. Ander kulture het, hulle het ander inkomste. Ons wil bewys dat dit kan werk.
So, you know all about this. You're involved in this. It's very innovative, very progressive. But I can't help thinking this is a little village somewhere. Can this model work universally in South Africa?
Yes, it definitely can. But somebody had to start somewhere. So nearly 20 years ago, we decided to try and build a socially mixed community that would also live in harmony with nature. And that does mean that people who qualified for housing subsidies lived next door to people who were chartered accountants. And it was extremely difficult to do. For just give you one example. When the municipality rates properties, they rate the area according to a certain value. So if it's rated as a middle class area, the rates payable by the poorer people forces them out. The same applies to banks.
Gentrification.
Banks when somebody applies for a loan, rates the area and decides on the value of the houses, and then the financing decision follows. That's also exclusionary. So it was extremely important to have a laboratory where you could figure out how to change the system in a way that allowed for inclusion. It's pretty high density. It's got schools, it's got businesses, sewage systems that don't depend on the municipality, renewable energy, and so on. That basic urban development model is replicable in other areas, and there are examples of that are starting to happen. We are going to, especially in the context of our energy crisis, we are going to be forced to generate more and more of our energy from our rooftops. That means changing the way in which the grids work. It's going to change the way in which we use sewage, how we process it, and how we process waste. And when you start creating a purpose for living together, not just for the sake of living together, you create a vision and you create a motivation and what people really crave in South Africa, which is a sense of community. When you have a sense of community, you have a multiplicity of eyes in the space. And when you have a multiplicity of eyes, you have a secure space. When you have a secure space, children can play in the public spaces. Right. When children can play, you know that community has got a future.
Absolutely. I mean, Herman, you're smiling here. Are you excited? I saw you smiling and nodding. Are you excited? I don't see much of this where I live.
Yeah, well,
what's exciting?
Reddy, I'm sure you're aware.
Hold on,
oh,
no,
you're aware we're only 2.5 years in
yeah,
government,
you like that,
and we've. But it's a fact. I think I like facts. I don't really like to deal with theory. We're 2.5 years into government, but our achievement in terms of affordable accommodation for our people, it's one of my government's priority.
Okay.
Okay, my question here is directed to the mayor. I would want to know if an inclusive inner city will be a reality in the inner city, as when people are being pushed out of the inner city. We have a big squatter camp in Boysens where we've got 8,000 shacks where people are living there. And most of the people that are living there are people that have been pushed from the bed buildings in the inner city, and some were pushed from the sectional titles where they were living in the inner city. So how are you going to build an inclusive inner city while people are being pushed? You're coming up with projects which is Bertram's priority block project, where right now you're looking at 6 flats which you need to evict. Where are they going to go? And you don't engage with the people. You just do it on yourself, and we don't understand what affordable housing that you are talking about is.
Mr. Mayor.
You know, our
Mr. Mayor,
inner city rejuvenation plan, it's a document, it's a policy passed by the City Council of Johannesburg. And we've taken upon ourselves as government that as we give you this right to invest in this property, where you can demonstrate to us that you'll build affordable accommodation for our people. And it has to really be mixed use, really looking at student accommodation, looking at making sure that our people can afford to really live in these properties. But in the meantime, once obviously we as government approves your proposal, we've taken it upon ourselves as government to find out a temporary accommodation for this very same people who are living in these properties.
But if they are further and further away from work opportunities,
no,
from
it's
transport
in the inner city, because we can. I'm sure already you've been in some of the buildings. I'm sure you know we cannot allow people to live under this type of conditions, and we say we give up on this. We have to really try, and we are doing it. Fortunately enough, we've identified 500 buildings. We've already got 154 of them out there on tender. We were asking proposals from the private sector, please build affordable accommodation for our people, build student accommodation for our students in the city of Johannesburg.
Chris from Johannesburg Homeless Network.
Hi, thanks, Reedy. I think there is a solution. I've been looking at homelessness over the last couple of years and came to the conclusion that the best way to help homeless people is what we call inclusionary neighborhoods, creating inclusionary neighborhoods. And basically what that means is it's a group of people that represent, that have an integrated plan for a neighborhood, whether it's a suburb or whether it's a inner city node. So, but it doesn't just include landlords and owners. It also includes spiritual people, social people, educational people. And in that way, you have a bottom-up approach where you're able to look at the specific needs of that neighborhood. And of course, as we've heard today, housing is a massive one. And possibly inclusionary housing is one of the solutions. But I do believe there are pilots that are being done in the city as we speak. And I'm really hopeful that it can work.
And we need that thing again, the courage, the political will, the vision to do it. This is not rocket science. Ask your question, please, while we come to you, very quickly.
My name is Dan Love. I just want a good clarity, simple from the guys in the management or in the governance of the state. Why are you failing to create free quality accommodation for students instead of giving them housing allowance that cannot even survive in Braamfontein? I'm sure according to the definition of the mayor, a low-cost housing is something that probably costs less than 3,000. You can't get that in Braamfontein. So why can't you just have a free accommodation for students, quality within the Braamfontein city?
You touched on that quickly. Give us the assurance again.
Well, I can assure you, in fact, one of these days we're going to be launching one of the student accommodation project in Braamfontein, where where students will pay less than half of what they're currently paying from the private developers. This because it's the city of Johannesburg that is subsidizing this. But obviously we can't give it for free because we're a municipality. We rely on collecting of revenue from our residents. So we can give, but up to what stage. But one thing we can guarantee our students that the rentals that the city of Johannesburg is actually helping to finance, the rentals will be half of what they're currently paying.
Okay, very quickly, please. Where's Vuyiswa? We're going to have the last word, very quickly.
Njengoba esithi uzawenza ulungisa ama-flat kwi-inner city wenza ama-RDP houses kwi-inner city uzawenza njani ngoba kwi-inner city kugcwele ama-developers ama-private developers lapha abenza ama-building every day yena lezi RDP houses azazenza edrobheni uzazenza kweyiphi indawo?
Is it private developers? Have we sold our city to private developers at the expense of the people?
We have 154 properties that we've already taken over. We've identified the over 500. We're going to take back the city from the criminal elements. So it's not going to be an easy decision.
But it's less about the criminals, but the presence of private money, private property developers who are not taking into account the socio-economic reality.
Absolutely. We're doing it
You're
for
obsessed
our
with the
people.
criminals. She didn't ask about
that.
No.
I'm saying is these properties are hijacked by criminal syndicates.
Okay. The last word, how do we bring this together?
Okay, so private developers are not the enemy. It is the city's job to grant development rights, to determine who develops what, where, and for who and how. And the city needs to use its power of granting development rights to compel private developers to do the right thing and to build these inclusionary developments. We cannot just be seeing malls coming up. Those malls are approved by the city. These big gated communities are approved by the city. The city needs to put its thinking cap on and exercise its ability to grant development rights and compel private developers to reinvest in the communities. You touched on the Community Reinvestment Act. We can bring those types of policies into effect. The city has that type of power at its disposal, and they should use their development rights to reinvest into communities and to build affordable, inclusive developments.
We're going to leave it there. South Africa, we know, and it's been confirmed, has some of the most unequal cities in the world. We are used to a sharp divide between Sandton and Alex, Constantia and Khayelitsha, KwaMashu and Umhlanga. We struggle to imagine cities in which we all live side by side without high walls and private security separating suburbs from the slums. And yet, more equal cities have been built in Europe, in Asia, and Latin America, as we've just heard as well. Will we ever get there? You decide. Don't forget to vote in the elections on the 8th of May. Watch the second hour of this debate online now or on SABC on Wednesday at 10 p.m. From me, Rea Vaya, goodbye.